sort of starting point for this paper is, the internet is an overwhelming place. And the point of the internet for me is to bring eyeballs to things that those eyeballs might be interested in. And today we're taking the perspective of the things that these eyeballs might be interested in. So we're thinking about content, and content wants attention. The way you get attention, first of all, is to be put in front of some eyeballs. So that's necessary. If people don't see you, it's really hard for them to pay attention to you. But just being seen isn't enough. So if you want people to really engage with you, then, a newspaper article, it might flash up on my screen, but for me to read it, I need to have some priors about whether it's worth reading or not. And there's all sorts of things that affect the likelihood with which I'm actually going to engage with this content. The source of this content, the trust that I have in it, the experience that I have with this or similar things that make me think that this is likely to be worth spending my time on. Our starting point for the paper is that the platforms, social media platforms in particular, is going to be the focus for this presentation, have the ability to control both these aspects, to control both what it is that consumers are seeing and also the way that that content is being presented, and therefore the extent to which that content is being trusted or not trusted. So that might involve explicit certification, putting stars by things to show that this is from a better provider. It might involve ancillary information, in social media, who else follows this person, how many followers they have. It might involve where on the screen this appears or the way that it's presented. We're going to take a pretty abstract approach to this latter aspect, and we're going to take as our starting point a monopoly social media platform that's going to price both of these aspects, the steering of views and the certification of views. And we're going to use that to explore the implications for what kind of content appears on a platform, its quality, and how diverse this content is in some horizontal sense. Okay, so these two tweets, they are tweets. This is old. Donald Trump is back on X now, but for a while he was banned from X. Kind of extreme versions of these considerations. So in terms of controlling the number of views that you have, at some point, Twitter deleted Donald Trump's account, and he went from having many views to 0 views. You can also see here, though, aspects of certification. So that may be a check mark. It might be a blue check mark or a gray check mark. It might be, again, this community notes is a way of affecting the way that the information is presented. If you click through on Joe Biden, you can see how many people he's following. Sometimes it will tell you things like, your good friend Greg is also following this person. That might affect the way you trust and have confidence in that content. We're interested in this in part because there's relevant policy associated with content moderation. And in particular, there's a recent investigation of Twitter, now X, and the way that it's charging for certification. So there's some legislation around moderation and the potential harms around it. In the EU, in the UK, in the US, in Canada, we have proposed legislation. And I think this is an MP, I believe, I should know, who launched this concern back in the day, and there's now an explicit investigation of the fact that Twitter, now X, is explicitly charging for the so-called verified status, the blue check marks for those who use it. Okay, what we're going to do in this paper is present an abstract model of platform steering and certification. The platform is going to have perfect information about quality, so whether this is good content that consumers might be interested in or bad content that consumers are going to be less interested in. Thanks, Jacques. They're going to, so they know the quality, but there's going to be a second-degree price discrimination problem around the fact that they don't know how much these content providers are willing to pay to be seen by users. Okay, so formally, that's the problem that we're going to investigate, and we're going to use it to ask certain questions. What are the implications of content moderation for sale, and how do steering and certification interact? Why is it that platforms are using both of these tools? Isn't just the ability to control views enough? And the economics here, and I know at least one person has to leave early, so I'm giving away the punchlines, is that imperfect certification, the fact that certificates are going to be, the same certificate is issued to both good content providers and bad content providers, so that when the consumers see a good certificate, they don't know exactly what it is. That increases the value to the platform of having good content providers with low willingness to pay for views. Essentially, you're subsidizing these good content providers with low willingness to pay as a means to raise revenue from bad content providers. Because if consumers knew that bad content was bad content, they would never pay any attention at all. To get some attention to that bad content and to get that bad content to pay for that attention, you have to bundle it in with some good content. And so that makes these low willingness to pay views, low willingness to pay good content more valuable for the platform. That can be good for consumers as well. So that's kind of the normative implication that we come to next. There are some, if you enforce perfect certification, some of this low value good content, it just wouldn't be worth it for the platform to provide. Now it becomes valuable because it gives them a route to monetize bad content, but consumers benefit because that's content that would be on the platform now that would not be on the platform if you forced perfect certification. And so that's kind of the counterpoint to Breton's concern to some extent. In the paper, we also run some comparative statics and look at some positive conclusions. Under what circumstances is imperfect certification more or less likely to arise? I'm going to give a bit less of that in today's presentation than appears in the paper. So that was the introduction. I've put in some kind of stopping points for questions and comments, but feel free to keep them coming throughout the presentation as well. Right, so next I'm going to move on to describing the model in somewhat greater detail. So we're going to have three different kinds of players, and there's going to be many content providers, or if you want to think of it as pieces of content, who want attention, and some of them are going to want engaged attention. I'll make that distinction clear as we move forward. We're going to have a monopoly platform that's going to direct content and messages to different consumers in exchange for money from the content providers. So the content providers are going to pay for views and certificates. And then we're going to have consumers who are deciding whether or not to pay attention to what they see. We're going to have this interpretation of a social media platform because we're not going to have consumers pay cash, neither to the platform nor to the content. So, you know, that's the sense in which this is a social media platform. This is what happens when you co-author with other people. You get data that you don't completely recognize, but let me try and explain to you the sense in which this is representing our model as I understand. So my co-authors tell me that, you know, on the left-hand side here, we have good content. This is stuff that they, as users, want to see. They're very interested in the music of this Concrete Boy boat, you know, and they're also interested in hearing about online Zoom seminars associated with content moderation. So this is content that they as users definitely value. Some of that good content has greater value to be seen than others. Okay, so this Lil Yachty finds it worthwhile to have a blue check mark and uses his account to promote his music, to promote his concerts, to gain celebrity that he values, and that presumably is worth quite a lot to him. Leo, I'm sure, wants his seminar to be successful, but presumably the views are not quite so valuable to him. Okay, on the right, I have content that the users of the account don't value very much. So I don't know what this sentence means. I don't think my co-authors who had this sentence appear in their social media account know what it means. But apparently it's important enough for Milesh to pay to receive a blue check mark and to want to promote. This is maybe bad content that's also not valued very much by the content provider. And in this case, this is a co-author of mine, so I'm confident to say that this tweet has little value to users nor to him. So that's the kind of data that we're going to be interested in. I'm going to kind of ignore this because this is stuff that the content provider doesn't particularly want and the users don't particularly want. But I'm going to be interested in this good content, some of which values very much being seen and some of it values less to be seen, but that users want to see. And this bad content that the content provider wants to be seen. That's how I'm going to be interpreting these different kinds of content. Consumers, they're going to receive this content with a message attached, and depending on this message, they take decisions whether to look at these posts and engage in these posts. I'm going to think of a message leading to a belief that the content is content that the user is interested in and wants to engage with. Okay, so given some message, there's going to be some belief that this is something that I'm interested in, and the contrary belief that this is something that I'm not interested in. And they're going to inspect with this probability A mu that I'm going to think of an attention function. So this is going to be increasing. So the more likely it is to be interesting content, and the more likely a user is to engage with that content. Okay. And the content providers will come to in just a second, will want this attention. In the paper, we provide a micro foundation for this attention function that allows for a welfare interpretation, but I'm going to skip over that today for the purposes of the presentation. So there is one. That one allows me to talk about welfare, but for today, I'm not going to get into that. All right, I want to focus more on these content providers, and we're going to have a unit mass of good content, and the provider's value for engagement is given by this parameter theta. This theta is private information, so the content provider knows how much they value information, but the platform does not. What I mean by engagement is being read by an interested consumer. When this piece of content is read by an interested consumer, the provider gets some payoff theta. And if it's not read or the consumer's not interested, they get this payoff 0. And theta is distributed according to some distribution. So the payoff to a good type content who gets V views of interested readers with a message with a certificate mu is the attention that that message gets multiplied by the number of views that that message gets, multiplied by the payoff per interested view. Okay, so this is where this is coming from. So that's good content. There's infinite bad content that consumers can't distinguish from good content providers, but the platform can tell good and bad content. So, you can think of it as the consumers have to read it to know what's good and what's bad. You can think that the platform can read it as well and figure that out just as well, but the platform only has to read it once and then can allocate it to all V views. So I think it's not a horrible assumption to assume that the platform can distinguish this, but consumers can't. You can also think that the platform, by viewing the way that consumers engage, can figure out pretty quickly what's good and what's not. Consumers are never going to be interested after reading it. They're never engaged, but the bad content just values being inspected, even if they aren't engaged with. And this value is normalized to 1. You know, with these infinite bad content, then we can just find bad content that's valued at 1. Okay, and so what that means is the payoff to the bot who gets the same, who gets this message mu and v views is going to be, again, the attention provided times the number of views multiplied by their value per read view, which is just 1. Okay. So these bad content value being seen, good providers want deeper engagement, and that's going to be, so far that's not substantive. I'm going to make that substantive in this next slide. Okay, so as I mentioned, the platform can distinguish good and bad providers, decide how many times each piece of content is seen. Acquiring views, whether interested or not, I'm missing a bracket, is going to cost the platform gamma per view. All right, so you can interpret this as, rather than showing content, you could show an ad, and that ad they can charge gamma for. Another interpretation is that you need to give gamma units of surplus per view to the consumer. And we're going to assume that gamma is less than 1, otherwise there's no hope of selling views to bad content. So for any kind of view, there's this cost content. To get relevant content, okay, and to get interested viewers who might care about this content, there's an extra cost C. So, you know, you can show this kind of bad content to anyone and they're not going to find it very interesting. But, you know, this kind of content is only of value, presumably, to academic economists working in self-regulation, and the platform has to do a bit of work and use data and figure out who such people are. Even this kind of content, you know, if I was on Twitter, I wouldn't get an awful lot from it, but apparently Matt and Rahul get a lot from it, and the platform figures that out and shows it to them. That uses data, that uses algorithms, that comes at some cost. It gets harder and harder to find interested people as they show more and more views, and that gives us this convexity in this kind of targeting of interested viewers. Okay, so untargeted views cost this gamma V, and to get V interested views costs this additional convex cost added to the linear cost associated with just kind of any view. Very good. All right, so I talked a lot, but you know what it comes down to is there's not so many moving parts to the model. There's a consumer attention function associated with this different associated with different certificates. So the more I trust the certificate, the more attention consumers are going to give. There's a distribution of how much good type content values attention that's distributed according to this F. And there's this cost to the platform of untargeted and targeted views, gamma and C. All right, so with that in place, we can now turn to the platform's problem and to the mechanism design problem that the platform faces. So it doesn't observe theta, okay, but we're going to use this sort of standard revelation principle approach to say, to have people self-report and then allocate according to this theta. So we're going to have a certificate associated with each type of good content. We're going to represent that by this kind of message assigned to good content. For every type of good content, there's going to be a number of good views assigned. Okay. For every type of good content, there'll be a corresponding number of bad views assigned. Okay. And what that's going to do is it's going to determine the quality of the certificate. So if I have a theta that gives VG associated with a theta, there's going to be a certificate. Associated with the certificate is going to be a certain number of good views and bad views, and then we're going to have just Bayes' rule is going to tell us what the likelihood of a good content is given the certificate M. Okay, so having set up this M, really I'm only going to be interested in this belief associated with the message associated with theta. And finally, we're going to have the price that's going to be charged to a good content of type theta that's going to get message M and VG good views. We're going to assume that the bad content that has no private information is fully extracted, and that these bad content providers are just going to pay 1 for each bad view that they get, multiplied by the attention function. Okay. Oh, I don't have that written down, but I should. So these bad content, they're getting a payoff of A mu times V, and that will be the price that they pay. Now, the VB, I can turn into I can represent by VGs and mu's and rewrite, and that's what's going to bring us to the platform problem. Okay, so the platform problem in principle is complicated. You know, I could have many different messages associated with, sorry, I could have many different thetas associated with the same message, and so on and so forth. In fact, we employ some simple but familiar tricks from mechanism design to simplify the problem. So in particular, one thing is, although there's many different messages that things could appear, it's going to be just fine to think of a belief of a quality of certificate assigned theta by theta, and point-wise solutions are going to be solutions to the overall problem as long as the allocation is non-decreasing, and that's going to allow the platform problem to be a pointwise problem, type by type, and to be written in the following form. Now, this looks complicated, but some of it should be familiar. So it's very simple to kind of price discrimination, similar to price discrimination a la Musa-Rosen. So we have the allocation. In this case, the allocation is just the number of views times the attention that these views get, all right, multiplied by the virtual value, type by type. This phi is the virtual value that's going to allow us to respect the ICs in the mechanism design problem for the providers, okay, minus the costs of providing those views. Okay, so without this term and this term here, this would just be like Musa-Rosen. What we're adding is each time we show a good view, we're also going to be showing some bad views, and we're going to get revenue associated with bad views. That's what this term is kind of coming up with. That again, those bad views, how much they value being seen depends on this attention. And in the cost term, this mu hat is reflecting that there's costs associated with showing those bad views as well. Okay, so that's how this is related to the standard Musa-Rosen problem. Let me keep going. All right, so I'm going to give you some relatively simple benchmarks. And the first benchmark I'm going to think about is an engagement maximizing planner. Under certain assumptions I'm not going to get into now, that's also the welfare maximizing planner. And the engagement maximizing planner, the person who wants most engagement from consumers, will just give pure certification. You know, having bad content there only puts people off, so don't put any bad content there. Consumers don't care how much providers want to be seen, so that's going to mean that we're going to have egalitarian content. Like Leo and Little Yachty might value being seen more and more, but Matt and Rahul care just as much about seeing Leo's content as Rahul's Little Yachty's content, and so we should provide just as much of Little Yachty and Leo to these guys. The number of views should be constant for all theta. And then you're going to generate views to the point that marginal cost is equal to the marginal benefit. And, you know, that's a number we can write down. So that's a natural benchmark to think about. And we can compare how perfect certification relates to that benchmark. So under perfect certification, you're again never going to provide bad content. And then the only problem for the platform to choose is the number of views. And that then becomes identical to a kind of Mower-Rosen problem. We have virtual value times views minus the cost associated with those views. And the type by type first order condition writes as this. And now we have the same cost, but the benefit is the virtual value rather than the social benefit. Okay? And so just like Mower-Rosen, we're going to get a distortion away from, this is identical to Mower-Rosen, and we're going to get a distortion from the planner problem because the benefit is virtual value rather than social benefit. And that means we get a shift away from the egalitarian content. So we get stuff that really wants to be seen getting more views and stuff that doesn't value being seen so much getting less views. Whereas the planner problem would have this all be constant. Now we can compare that to a single imperfect certificate. With a single imperfect certificate, so I'm having mu theta equal to a constant mu hat. Each additional good view comes with a certain number of additional views of bad content and their associated revenue, also their associated cost. So the cost now alters because there's also cost associated with bad views, but the benefit now includes this benefit from sales to bad content. And we also have to moderate all of this by the diminished attention. And what this is going to do, okay, is this term means that these benefits are kind of squidged together, more similar term by term. We get more egalitarian provision for those served. We're also going to get more people served because some of these people who would not have been served under perfect certification, the platform wants to serve that good content because it's now subsidizing, it's now making it feasible to get more bad content views as well. So we get this kind of benefit from serving those. So what you see with this imperfect certificate is that line is becoming flatter. That's one sense in which we're getting more egalitarian views. And in addition, some people who weren't getting any views at all under perfect certification are now getting views under imperfect certification. So potentially this could be beneficial to welfare. Of course, there's costs associated with people being exposed to bad views as well. And here you can see that these guys are getting less good views than they had before. Okay, so the intuition here is that these consumers want to see more of this good content. We're not giving them an opportunity to pay for it directly. They can't directly subsidize the views. Exposure to bad content is a way to generate that indirect subsidy. And forcing this to be unbundled, forcing perfect certification, isn't necessarily going to be a good thing. Moreover, and I haven't really gotten into this, but there's a lot more discussion in the paper, this relationship between diversity and imperfect certification is going to depend on how quickly attention erodes as you degrade quality. And so this kind of convexity and concavity of the attention function turns out to be relevant and important for thinking about when imperfect certification arises. Right, so I still haven't got to the optimal mechanism, and I'm into my last 10 minutes or so, I think. So let me get there. The idea here is this single imperfect certification was helpful for the platform because it allowed it to monetize bad traffic. But you could see that I was having to sacrifice a lot from the high value traffic to get there. We were kind of flattening things out. Varying the certificate quality allows the platform to kind of use polluted certificates on the low value content to monetize the bad content without sacrificing so much revenue from high value content. Okay. And so using both instruments kind of helps with the price discrimination. this is a little bit reminiscent of like Denneker-McAfee and damaging goods by making the low value, in that case, consumers face a worse good. You're cannibalizing less from the good and allowing you to kind of extract more surplus than this. The idea here is the bad certificates are less appealing, and so you don't have to curtail the views as drastically from the good from the good willingness to pay ones. All right, we can show that both quality and views are non-decreasing in the quality of content. And now the first order condition, this looks a lot like the previous ones, but rather than having a fixed mu here and here, every time that mu turns up, I can make this mu depend on theta. And so now this is a type by type based optimization where it's not just the virtual value that's varying, but potentially the quality of the certificate that's varying as well. Okay, I'm going to show you the example again. These graphs I've been showing you that that have been illustrated examples have assumed a linear attention function. I'm going to show you the kind of corresponding one for the optimal mechanism. So first, I'm going to show you that with this linear attention and under these parameters, the quality of the certificate, above some level, we get perfect certification. But then this is the monotonicity that I was talking about. Lower value content gets a worse and worse certificate. Okay? It's going to be bundled in with more bad content. In terms of views, what we had before was perfect certification was this red line, and you can't see the red line extending up here, but it does. With a single imperfect certificate, we had this dotted green line. The optimal mechanism is this blue line. So in some region where we had perfect certification, above 0.75, we just have perfect certification, and we have the views associated with perfect certification. So the blue and the red are identical. Okay, but now this kind of drop off in views is not so dramatic because you're giving more and more views that's not cannibalizing these sales, because in order to get those views, you're polluting attention through bundling in bad content. Okay, and you can see that we're doing just as well as perfect certification here, but we're generating more views for the low value content. And what that means for welfare, and I know I haven't really given you welfare and I'm waving my hands at it, is something like this. If I'm doing identical to perfect certification, then I'm doing worse. There's no gain or no loss from the optimal mechanism relative to perfect certification. For those low value guys over here, they were getting nothing under perfect certification. So consumers who wanted to see some of this, they're only benefiting from the fact that these guys are being seen. It's over in this region here that consumers are suffering. Why? Because the number of views that this quality content, this willingness to pay content is getting is pretty much the same, but it's getting less attention because it's being bundled in with bad content. Okay, so in some region, the optimal mechanism is identical to perfect certification. In some region here, the optimal mechanism generates more welfare, and in some region here, the optimal mechanism generates less surplus than perfect certification would. Now, this is type by type virtual value. I haven't said anything about I haven't said very much at all about the distribution of F, of this theta, of this virtual value. And so you could imagine that different distributions put relatively more weight on this end or relatively more weight on that end. And in general, the welfare implication is going to be ambiguous. Okay. We do some other things in the paper, some comparative statics. I think the more interesting ones are around the convexity or concavity of the attention function, which has some interpretation as to a concave attention function is saying I'm suffering little from a degradation in quality. I'm not so bothered about rifling through bad content. You might think about that as an entertainment platform. And in a more convex attention function, then I'm very keen to avoid bad content. You might think of that as kind of, oh, this was supposed to say fake news. I need to fix my slides. And convexity means that the platforms have less incentive to certify bad traffic. So we should get closer to perfect certification. There's some other things we do in the paper, in particular interpretations of greater harm from bad content and addiction to social media that do intuitive things. There's related literature, including by BC. So maybe he'll tell you how I'm related in greater detail. And there's a lot on steering that's related, including work by Greg that I should point out, and biases in what gets shown when profit incentives are different from social incentives. Let me very briefly conclude. I think I have a minute left. I think there's kind of positive conclusions here in the paper. So the platforms make more profit from using both steering and imperfect certification, because this imperfect certification is a way to bring in bad revenue, revenue from bad content. So that's what the platform gets out of it. The normative conclusion is subtle, though, because perfect certification comes with trade-offs. It's bad to expose consumers to bad content. It's wasting their time. But at the same time, that subsidizes the views of good content that has low willingness to pay to be seen, and consumers gain from that. How that squares off depends on the shape of distribution functions, the shape of attention functions, and so on and so forth. I think for the application, there are things that are missing, that are interesting to think about. So Thierry Breton, the EC commissioner, one might say that his concern really was naivety, that when these people saw these blue check marks assigned to random things, it would never occur to them that there's some possibility that this person is paying for it, and that there's some cost associated with it. Similarly, we might think of externalities. I'll just say that and skip over it there. As many of you know, my midlife crisis involves haikus, so let me finish with that. The summary for this one is certify poorly so you can sell more to bots. Attention matters. Right? And I will leave it there, and thank you for your attention, and for BC for the discussion that's to come.
Thanks very much, Heski. Yes, Byung-Chul, over to you.
Okay, hi. Good to see you, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity to discuss the papers. Last couple of days, I read this paper, and it was a great joy to read more and more. And I really strongly recommend you, all of you, that the 40-minute talk for these very theory papers are challenging, and reading the paper through, you will get a lot from the papers. I'm just given 5 minutes and no slide, no summary of the papers. Normally that we spend quite a bit of time of the summary, and I will not do that. And I was, my role was to raise some interesting questions and suggestions for improvement. So I wanted to talk about my several comments and questions and possibly suggestions. So one of the things that when you look at this paper, the important part is the platform's technology to bring attentions, and the how they earn untargeted views for the bad content and targeted views for the good content. This is very important. So the authors spent quite a bit of time of these parts, and for example, that for bad views untargeted, and the gamma is the marginal cost of getting the untargeted views times V, right? And for targeted good views, that the gamma V plus C of V. So in the papers, there is a lot of discussion on this form of this technology, which is a cost function. For example, if the gamma approaches to 0, then platform can earn as many as the bad view with no cost. So one of the question was that, is there any way for you authors discuss about this technology in a more general forms, that the good view and bad view, the gamma and this the additive form of the C, is it integrated in one general way to capture that bad and view and probably in the middle? That was the because this is a quite interesting part, and many I think our economists in these areas would want to see that part, the platform's technology of this one, how it related to the way of the certifications and content moderation. So I think there is a big potential to earn more when we dig out this technology part. The second is that the interpretation of the gamma or surplus gamma has several interpretations here in the papers. One is the ad interpretation. It is the ad revenue, or consumers gain from these things to the gammas. But when I read the paper, I wondered that about this interpretation, how it is related to any micro foundations with gamma. The reason is the following. For example, think about the certification quality mu. One of the, here comparative statistics mentioned that the mu is non-decreasing in gamma. The intuition behind this comparative statistics is the lower gamma, which is cheaper to run the bad traffic, leads to more bad traffic. I totally agree with these interpretations. But on the other hand, think about it. The gamma also affects the marginal cost of targeted good view as well. And therefore, gamma is lower. Good view is also cheaper to earn. And I needed to have more additional explanation for this part. If edge revenue is lower, gamma is lower, then the platform might want to charge on the consumer side. Here, consumer is very passive players. The gamma doesn't affect the consumers, the business model part. But if gamma is really low, when we stuck to the edge interpretations, it means that there is no way that the subsidy happens, which is typical. The literature on the two-sided model with ad-funded platforms kicks in here, seesaw effect. So either way, I wanted to see that the paper addresses these little tricky interpretations associated with the gamma. Another thing that I want to raise the question is that platform issued multiple polluted certificates. And more certificates, as Heski said, it just sacrifice less the revenue from the high value good content, which is the beauty of the Musa and Rosen in the Continuum case, right? But is this necessarily meaning that the more certificate is the better for the platform or wage? So probably not, right? So I wanted to see some discussion that part, because it looks like that there are a number of the certificate in the real world, that we know that it's not captured by Continuum. But then, you mentioned about the one certificate case and two certificate case, right? And sometimes two certificate case could be worse than one certificate case, depending on all
It can never be strictly worse, because you can always choose just to replicate.
Yeah. So, but my point is that is either the more the better situation is to keep going or not. That is the I raised the questions. And then lastly, given I have the 1 minute, and so I know that we modeler need to minimize the one part of the component, which is the consumer side. Here, there is no heterogeneous aspect on the consumer side. All consumers value good content in the same way, regardless of the data. But and also in the papers, there is a very nice extension to the addiction and the losses from the bad content. This is cool. And all those extensions also consider homogeneous consumers. That is the extension from current model. But I wanted to see some discussion about what if there are two types of consumers, such that one type of consumer value the good content than the other type, or what if the some value the bad content as well. So here is the bad means that usually it's bad content, but if they have the different the valuation for the bad, so what happens? Those kind of the things can be discussed. Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more thing. Sorry that. So the last one, I'm currently have a paper with Shota Ichihashi and Do Shin-jeon, but that because I'm writing a paper in this area, so I wondered that currently we have the unlimited number of the bad content provided are prevalent. But here, under perfect certifications, the bad content is not shown at all, right? Then it is possible to think about the possibility that the bad content providers might have incentive to make their content more valuable to enter the market. Under the imperfect certifications, and I think that there is another idea that the bad content providers to enter market more, because it is now the open the door. So especially this is so if the cost of the creating good content is much higher than creating the cost of the creating the bad content. So you create the bad content and enter quickly when door is open, even though they don't try that when door is shut down. So I wonder that any dynamic view of the content moderations. I mean, I know that there must be a very, the single idea in one paper. So I'm not suggesting that you need to write about this one in this paper, but any other, other here, so we have a bunch of the other people's, any dynamic view of the content moderation related to this bad and good and steering sounds very, good areas to research for all of us, I believe. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joe. Heski, did you want to come back on any?
Yeah, I have a few things to say. So first of all, thank you very much for the kind comments and for the constructive comments as well, and engaging so much with the paper. I tried to take notes, and because I have a few things to say on a few different things that you had to say. On the last one, in terms of kind of endogenizing the quality of the content, there is some work out there by others that tries to look at that. So there's a paper by, I want to say the name is Srinivasan, but we cited in the paper where the content provider isn't sure what kind of content they're going to produce, and we endogenize the effort they make to make it good rather than bad, and so it gets a little bit at this question of endogenous quality that you're rightly interested in. So that would be a place to look at that, and I think there's a Sarvari paper that has some aspect of this as well. In terms of heterogeneity of consumers, there is some heterogeneity that's implicit in the model with regard to the attention function. So this comes to the kind of micro foundation of the attention function that I didn't really spell out in the presentation, but is there in the paper, that has consumers varying in the cost that they have to pay to read the content. And so different consumers are going to make that trade-off. Is it worth reading when I'm expecting the likelihood of going to content to be this much or that much? Now, you can make that heterogeneity on the cost, which is what we did, but it's completely equivalent to say people have the same costs of engaging in the content, but some value good content more and some value it less, and putting the heterogeneity in there. So I think those formulations would be pretty much isomorphic, actually. All right, and in terms of the technology in Gamma, I think part of the rationale for the linearity of bad content, so you know, the fact that the views that are given to bad content, those costs are just going up linearly in Gamma, that there's no shape in that cost function. I think that's implicit in the fact that we're assuming there's just infinite bad content. So, you know, whether I give each piece of content many views or many pieces of content one view, I think that intuition suggests that thinking of that provision as linear is a natural way to think about it. That's where we were kind of coming at it from. There was one intuition of quality and the cost gamma, that as we make views cheaper, why is it that we're seeing more bad content, and aren't we making good views cheaper as well? We are, but the relative cost of bad views is falling. So it's not just that all the costs are falling, but because one is gamma and one is gamma plus C, if I reduce C, then the ratio of gamma to gamma plus C is falling as well. So I think that's kind of the cheap intuition for that one. All right, so those are the things I had noted. Again, thank you very much for the comments. And I'm interested and curious to read your work as well. And I'm glad that there's growing interest in content moderation that I think is ever more relevant and pressing social issue. And I'm happy for more and more people to come into this community of researchers.
Thanks very much. So we have a few minutes left for questions from the audience. Does anyone have any questions they'd like to put to Heski?
Oh, I see something from Roland.
You okay reading that?
No, so the way we've set, so Roland, I don't know if you want to come online or I just read your comment. So it says, did I correctly understand that one bad content also has a positive social value, but consumer doesn't want to see it? No, in our model, the consumers value bad content at 0, and that's the social value of seeing it. So the reason they don't view it is they have a cost to viewing it. As BC highlighted, we can instead impose an explicit harm associated with reading bad content. That's an extension that we look at, but there's no value directly. Okay, good. I think I convinced you. Thanks for the question, and sorry to be unclear in the presentation. Maybe I should put this micro foundation in.
While other people think about it, maybe I could ask a quick question.
Sure.
I wondered if you'd thought at all about this issue of consumer naivete that you mentioned, because my initial intuition is that you could put something like that in the model just by assuming some fraction of consumers sort of exogenously have mu equals to 1 or something. It would be maybe a straightforward way of doing it, but is there a pitfall?
I mean, I think we have, you know, one of the extensions we look at is this addiction extension that says that essentially is another way of thinking about more people are looking at content than really should, or bad content than really should. And, you know, and what we get out of that, which is not very surprising, is that if more people are looking than should, then more bad content is provided. We didn't push that too hard because I don't want to go hard at the kind of welfare implications of addiction or naivete, which I feel slightly queasy about. But I think I agree. Like it's not hard to put that in. I think what we saw with the kind of addiction is what it does is what you would expect it to do. But thanks for the comment.
And I guess similarly, if the platform is also earning some ad revenue, and the advertisers care about being next to good content, that would just edge the content mix up a little bit in quality.
Yeah, I would think so. So that we really haven't thought about, but I share the intuition.